Hi, everybody. It's Movement, Art, and Soul with Karen Sparks. And this channel is about personal spiritual synthesis, individuation, enlightenment, wholeness, healing, etc. And as the channel name suggests, movement, art, and soul, talk about and work with people on different levels involving movement, art, and soul. And this particular playlist is going to be an introduction to some of the art topics that I'll be getting into as we go along. My question today, which I'm going to propose and then attempt to answer, at least from my own perspective, is how can art assist us with our personal spiritual synthesis, individuation, enlightenment, wholeness, healing, etc. And there are just so many ways we could look at that. So as I said, this is going to be my perspective. I'm going to do numerous videos, and I welcome you to comment and tell me about your journey and what some of your experiences have been. And I'm hoping that you're joining this community because you are interested in personal spiritual synthesis, enlightenment, wholeness, healing, and so on. So the first thing I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about how art has been a part of my life. And then from there, I'm going to introduce some different topics around how art can help us with our journeys. So when I was a very young child in school, I was turned off art, I would say, just from experiences that I had. There were different things going on in the classroom, and I just found myself just kind of shrinking away from it and not even thinking I could do art. So it's interesting because I had a couple of comments made to me, and now as an adult, I look back and say, oh, what a shame. What a shame that, little things like that, a comment or the way that art is set up for someone to experience can actually lead to a child shutting down from that. And if I take, when I take a look at my family, I can see that there were a lot of artistic people. My father, my mom, myself. Now my son is extremely creative, and I didn't look at art anymore after I was a child. I didn't take an art option in high school. Looking back at that now, I think, oh my gosh, I would have loved it. And so it's quite interesting. But I found myself doodling in high school. I also did a lot of writing and poetry. I didn't understand about doodling. Nobody told me about doodling. I never saw a little book about doodling or anything. And I would doodle on the side of my notes, which I continued to do into university and then even later. I even often counsel, and I'm kind of doodling on the side. Not that and what I'm about to say, you'll see it's not that I'm not paying attention. It actually helped me to focus, but I didn't know that. So going back to high school, I found that doodling, I would do all kinds of different lines and shapes. Lines can be horizontal and vertical, diagonal and curvy, and all kinds of shapes, geometrical shapes, shading. I didn't even know what I was doing. Occasionally, I would attempt to sketch a painting in my room that was hanging up on the wall. I just found myself so fascinated with it. And that really ought to have been a clue to me, but it wasn't. I just thought, I have no skill, and I'm just doodling because I like it. So anyway, doodling did help me to focus, but I didn't have the words for that at the time because I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. I just enjoyed it. And later, much later, like actually just 3 years ago, I did take a little simple internet thing around art therapy, and doodling was a little part of that. And when I saw some of the suggestions that they had for doodling techniques, I thought, oh my gosh, that's how I was doodling for years. And nobody actually told me how. So it's kind of funny when we see, you can doodle like this, you can doodle like that. Because if you just doodle, eventually you're just going to come up with things that what else can we play with? We can play with shapes, we can play with shading, we can play with lines and color. So I just thought it was quite interesting that what I took in the course was actually what I was doing for myself, meaning that the course was talking about how doodling can be really helpful to clear your mind, help you to focus, to relax, and so on. And I had a lot of pressure in high school to perform from well-intentioned parents. They wanted to help me to get really great grades because I wanted to go to university, but there was a lot of pressure around that, right? And I did feel really relaxed when I doodled. So that's an interesting thing. So that's just a little story there. Then, so I did not take any art after that. And I think that is quite interesting that later on I met someone who was an artist that wanted to do an exchange with me. She taught me some basics around art, and I taught her some basics around movement and breath. And I just fell in love with it and thought, there we are. Where have you been? I was just enthralled, and I found myself fascinated with form and color and just the whole entire process, sketching, drawing. I just fell in love with it, and haven't stopped since, and can't see myself stopping. My mother began to delve into art later in life, something like myself, and she's been an artist ever since and does some amazing work. I was also on a trip once way up north in Ontario, and I went into a shop, and I found this lovely older man in there with these gorgeous waterscapes done in watercolor. And I had a talk with him. I said, wow, you're amazing. He said, well, I only started after I retired. I said, no way. There's no way you could have just started now. I said, your work is just phenomenal. And he said, well, I love it. He said, if I would have known that I would have loved it as much as I do, he said, I probably would have done it as a hobby all along. He said, but here I am retired, and this is what I do now. I've got a gallery, I'm selling my work. So, I hope that this inspires you. If you are an artist already, well, then maybe you're here to pick up some things, or to look at how you can do and use your art as a personal spiritual tool for your synthesis. Whatever the reason is for you being here, I hope it serves you. So that's a little bit about my story and a little bit about my background. You can start art at any time, and you can use art for so many different things. So yes, art is very therapeutic. So let's start with that. We do know, and I know, that art, there's a whole thing called art therapy, as most of you probably know, and that in itself is quite a specific therapeutic approach. Now, I do use art when I work with people, but I'm not a certified art therapist. I just use art as a therapeutic tool. So art has been used to help with trauma. Yes, we can express things that we may not want to verbalize yet, or we may want to express things that go along with what we're talking about during our sessions. Art, it's what they say, a picture can tell a huge story in just one picture. Pictures are pre-verbal, and pictures do say more than words. There's so much that you can put into a picture. So in help with trauma, just doing art itself in many different ways is a step that we can take to help release our stress, not only to express things, but just to not even think about what we're doing. Just start to write whatever comes out, a poem, a story. Just start to paint, sketch, doodle, whatever. So it can be very open-ended, or it can be done with a specific purpose and intent and have a little more structure around it. I'm very open to working with art in a variety of ways because I find it so fascinating and fun to explore. Another way that art can be used to help with trauma is that healing symbols can come up in our art, whether it's accidentally because we can draw and paint and sketch and whatever, make a collage, whatever it is we're doing without thinking too much, and just allow whatever comes up to come up. And so a healing symbol can emerge and encourage us and guide us. Or we can pick something that we're drawn to in the moment. Right now I'm looking at a butterfly. There's a picture of a butterfly in front of me behind the screen here. And a butterfly represents to me the psyche or the soul, and it's a symbol for transformation. I worked with the symbol of a butterfly for a very long time, and my last business name actually had the butterfly as one of its symbols, and I still put that up on my webpage today. So it can be some sort of a symbol that we connect with. Now, I've connected with symbols as long as I can remember. I remember being a child and just sitting in the garden and different symbols like the sun or the rays of the sun, or the idea of around a fairy or a lake or a little flower, different kinds of symbols when I was really, really young, like 5, 6 years old, a dragonfly, insects, a garden. Different symbols encouraged me and guided me, and I didn't really understand how at that time when I was so young, but I remember those things so vividly. Symbols seem to stick in my mind and in many people's minds in a way that they impact us on a deep level. We dream with symbols. Dreams have been something that I have also paid attention to ever since I was a teenager. And we can do a dream series later. But I'm talking about the symbols. So in symbols for trauma, for example, if you have a dream, there's so many symbols in your dream. What stands out for you? And you can then do a series of paintings, sketches, collages, drawings, or just look for pictures that have some of those symbols in it. And again, they can encourage us, guide us out of a challenging inner psychic space. And depending on our level of trauma and how we're currently functioning in our day-to-day life, it can be a very useful tool. So when I say that, I mean that there are various levels to trauma. We are on a continuum. So when something happens to us, we can use the word trauma, but trauma is on a continuum. There can be trauma that puts us into a catatonic state. There can be trauma that just kind of disrupts our daily life, and after a brief break with a rest, we can feel that we can get right back into a routine and just continue working on whatever our experience was that was traumatic in our daily life. But we're not to the point where we can't function or we're catatonic. So again, there are different levels to this. I want to make that very clear, because if you're in a situation where trauma has led you to a place where you are unable to function, okay, after a brief rest, because granted, sometimes a shocking thing can happen into our system where there's trauma, and for a short period of time we may need to sort of just rest, take a break, a vacation or something like that, rest from it, get some support, and while we have support ongoing in our life, we can easily get back to our daily routines. So that's not an extreme form. But if you're in a situation where you are finding it difficult to function, then I really highly recommend that you immediately get some support around that. Okay? So when we talk about trauma and using trauma in forms of art, so how can I work through a trauma or feelings that are coming up for me that are traumatic, experience that has been traumatic with art? So it's the same sort of idea around working with symbols, around seeing what comes up, as well as getting the support and working through it on a multiple of other ways, including moving the body and using the breath. So helping people with trauma, it can involve art, it can involve movement, and also when I talk about the soul, I'm going to do a playlist on that. I work with the body. So yes, movement works with the body, but on a soul level, you have your soul counseling, and also that there are points that you can do on the body, acupressure points, Jinshin Jutsu points. They're just energy points on the body that can assist us in our healing process through trauma, through stresses, and through various imbalances in the body. So, but in this particular video, we're focusing more on the art. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention about that. And if you're here and you're working through some traumatic experiences, that would be a little piece of homework for you, is to collect some symbols around what draws your attention that you feel supports you to get through the trauma. Something that reminds me of how you're feeling right now. So, you could say, okay, what reminds me of how I'm feeling right now? That could be a symbol you can work with. And what is something that I feel I can move towards in order to heal? What would that look like? What's a symbol for that? And that's something you can look at. You can also work with me in a counseling session in order to identify some of these things and work through them and get some support around them if you need to. So how else can art be used to assist us in our personal spiritual synthesis? We need to quiet our minds. When we're working towards enlightenment, personal spiritual synthesis, I'm sure many of you, especially if you're involved in a martial art that is healing oriented and oriented around supporting your journey towards enlightenment, then you would have heard about quieting the mind, about how our internal dialogue and chatter gets in the way of taking action in our lives or just relaxing and rejuvenating at other times. So in other words, on our journey towards enlightenment, if we're too busy in the head, which in our society, we just have to see it's still quite rampant, right? We're so busy in our minds that sometimes we don't even take action because our mind is so busy that we don't know what is the right course of action, or we don't rest and rejuvenate effectively enough, which is how we get some of that energy back in order to do what we need to do in our life. Because the mind is racing, we can't rest fully, so we're losing that opportunity to gain energy. And then we may not get things done which need doing, or that we may want to be doing to move forward in some way. So quieting the mind. Art can be used to quiet the mind. I find it's amazing how many times I work and I just realize that time has gone by and I have gotten into this flow, which is so amazing because as a movement artist, I experience that in yoga, in martial arts, and during hiking and walking or just sitting by the water, meditating, that the mind quiets. And so art has been another tool that I use. And I notice how that assists me in getting into that zone, which is a wonderful place to be, to gain insight and to gain energy and to get guidance internally. Another way that art can be used is that, as I mentioned up when we talked about trauma, is that you can explore symbols. Now, symbols can come up in our art without our intending to. So, for example, sometimes when I'm painting, I may be painting something and then over to the left of it, as I look I would step back and look at the piece, I think, oh my goodness, this little line here looks like a horse. And so I may want to go into that and look at that line or lines and maybe bring that out a little bit more and dialogue with it and say something like, okay, what does the horse mean to me? What color is this horse? How do I feel when I look at this horse? Does it bring up any other images when I look up at this horse, or any other feelings or thoughts or a story? And so when you're painting and you can allow yourself to see something that might be appearing in your art and allow yourself to go with that, then it will teach you something. It will tell you something. Okay. So we may want to intentionally paint, collage, draw, or whatever you want to do creatively, artistically, a symbol that you somehow resonate with. So you might want to explore the symbol consciously by, let's use the example of the horse. That's something that did come up for me. It started with a dream, and then it showed up in some paintings, and there's some other things that have been going on with this horse thing too. So you may want to say, okay, well then I'm going to paint a horse. What color horse does it want to be? Mine wants to be a white horse. And then somehow it starts to become a different image as well. It could become a series. Maybe it'll even shift from a horse into something else as you keep working with that symbol. So symbols can tell us many things about where we are right now in our life or our journey, right? It can tell us where we're moving towards, what's going on in our internal landscape or in our environment or in the world. because we have various areas of focus. We focus internally, we focus on things in our immediate environment, and then on a greater environment, and then in the world, and so on in the universe. So art can be telling us these things on multiple levels. A symbol might show up in your art and talk to you about something you might need or what your next step is. It can be an inspiration. It could be relating a message. It could be offering guidance, and it could be a healing symbol. So I painted something that came from an old picture that I remember my parents talking about when I was growing up. So I was brought up Roman Catholic. This is just to give you an example of a symbol. I was brought up Roman Catholic. When I got older, I began to explore, like in my late 20s, it began for me to explore other spiritualities, paths, you might call it, spiritual paths and ways of understanding spirituality and religion and what this is all about for us humans on this planet. And the particular image that I'm talking about is, at least this is how it was explained to me, a guiding angel, so a guardian angel, that it's a guide, large, overshadowing sort of two children. There was a boy and a girl, and the girl's a little bit older, and this symbol shows up in a couple of different ways, like it's either in the woods or over a bridge. Often it's a bridge over water. So anyway, I came across this many years later and was reminded of this image. And then there was some trauma that I went through. I talked about this in another video around where there was a lot of death in my family, and then my dog passed on, and there were some other situations in my life. And so that was a little traumatic for me. And I ended up painting this guardian angel. And it's so amazing because in this one particular tapestry that I have of it, it shows the crown chakra and a glow around the head, which is so fascinating on multiple levels there. And so I did a version of that painting, and I hung it up in my room, and it was so soothing to me during that time, and still now today. I love it. I just love it. So painting it made it so personal to me. And of course, I altered it and changed it a little bit, so it became more personal and just spoke to me because I altered it to make it personal to me. So there's an example there of what a symbol can do to assist you during a traumatic time, and how just allowing something to grab your attention that you find helpful. There were also some other symbols that I've used after that have been helpful to me in different ways as well. So art can be used, therefore, as a part of our path towards integrating and wholeness and healing and personal spiritual synthesis. And it is incredible when you do it for this, but it can also just be plain fun. So let's interject that before we go to the next point. It can just be plain fun. I have painted things just because I looked at something and went, I just felt giddy or silly or just like a kid again, or just fun. I just want to paint this because it's fun. I like it. It doesn't make sense. And it's so, I'm laughing now because it's so liberating, because it doesn't even have to make sense. I'll give you a personal example of that. Just pure fun. I went to a river that isn't too far from me, and I made this a habit during the time I was telling you about too, but I still go there now. But I made it a habit to go meditate at the crack of dawn when it was a nice morning, because the colors that would come up on the sunrise were like tangerine and magenta, just gorgeous, beautiful shades of color. And on a sunny day, it would reflect that into the river. So I took some photos of it and then did a painting. When I did the painting, I just explored with the most vibrant colors, and I didn't care whether it looked like a sunrise or the river. I just did it kind of in an abstract way. And why I wanted to share that with you is I want to bring something up. I was in a group at the time. I was taking a class on sketching and painting, whatever. And so I brought it in and showed it to the teacher, and I laughed with him, and he said, where is this? I said, well, I actually went to a river. So one of the students standing behind me was an older woman, and she said, sunrises don't look like that. And I could just feel myself just starting to tense up. And then I just thought, nope, don't go there. Karen, do not take that on. And I just laughed and said, well, kind of look like that to me. I said, tangerine is a color that shows up when I go and see the sunrise. And then the person said, well, I know that river you're talking about. It's just a muddy river. And I said, well, have you ever been there at the sunrise? Because it wasn't. It's not just a muddy river. It gets muddy. Things get stirred up. And sure, I've gone there before, and there's no light in the sky. The light's really kind of gray. It looks like a muddy river, period. But things change and shift. So don't let people put things into your head. I mean, this was an artist herself, which is quite appalling. I mean, if you want to think about it, but you can't assume just because we are artists that we are all going to be open and the same and non-judgmental and open to expressing things in many different ways, right? We're not all that way. I mean, we still have whatever's going on in our inner landscape, which then comes out in our words and behaviors. Is that not true? It is true. So don't be put aback by it. I didn't let that happen to me, and it doesn't bother me, not even today, because I knew that was more about her, and the fact that if we can't even see nature in many different ways, that we shut down our experiences of what we can perceive, because things are not always the same. So a little point for you too is go out into nature, bring your camera, which if you're an artist, you probably do this anyway. But if you're just new and you're exploring, or if you're an artist and you haven't done this before, well then try the same place on different times. Try it during different times of the year, during different light, during different perspectives. I'm not like I'm not an advanced photographer. I could say I like photography. I wouldn't call myself a photographer. They can do the most amazing things with their filters and their settings and so on. But I mean, just go out and just take a normal picture. Just a normal picture with an iPad. A regular camera doesn't have to be very expensive. Your phone, these phone cameras these days are just amazing. Most of the time I work from my iPad. So this is the fun part of it. Don't let anybody judge you, okay? Go out and do what speaks to you. Try different art styles. You don't need to stick to the same style. You really don't. You can explore. Try this and try that. Try being silly. Try being serious. Try realistic. Try expressionistic. Try impressionistic. Try all kinds of different things. So what else? Along those lines, I think for my next point, this fits in really well with what I was just talking about, is that art in our personal spiritual synthesis can show us things about ourselves, like how we approach it. How do I usually approach art? So if I think about that situation with the woman and myself, I think, oh, there's an interesting perspective going on there from that artist, right? How am I approaching it just today? Maybe she was in a bad mood or something. How am I approaching it today? How am I feeling today? In terms of my inner landscape, things will show up in my art that may relate to that. What was my process when I painted this? And I've learned a lot about myself through my art process, meaning like, how do I approach that art? How did I do this painting? And it taught me so much about how to let go more, how to go and relax more into what I'm doing, how to trust more. So amazing. What's going on for us? Our art will just speak volumes. It really will. And a final point before we move on today, or final point or two, is the one would be that art is about your story. So if I talk to you about, well, art is telling you about yourself. We all have a story. I have a story, and I can tell my story in a myriad of ways. Depending on my mood, I might tell the story this way. Depending on what part of myself is speaking, I might tell the story this way. In other words, am I going to tell my story from an empowered position, or am I going to tell my story from a self-pity position or a self-important position, a position in which maybe I don't believe in myself. So how am I going to tell my story? Art is an expression coming from within, so somehow it is telling about your story and perhaps about what you want to share. Maybe you want to share joy, beauty today, hope. Or maybe you want to share something that's going on that you know many people, perhaps in your experience or in your immediate environments, do not want to see or look at. And you feel, oh, I want to express this because people are just not seeing this, or I want to make this point. So art can be very intentional. For example, there have been artists who just have painted animals in nature. And some people think, well, gosh, that's not what art is all about, just beauty. Well, for them, that's what they want to share. Why would we want to put that down? If that's how they're painting and that's what their message is, which is an amazing message to begin with, wonderful. But if an artist, for example, there was an artist around the war times, I'm sorry because I don't have the name. But it was either World War I or World War II, and there was a woman artist who was painting some of the scenes of suffering. And so maybe sometimes we might want to bring to the attention globally about a situation. I know that not everyone was exposed to the horrors and the suffering of the war and what the wars have done to generations and ancestral patterns that were passed on to generations later. A lot of people don't even today still understand the impact of that. As a counselor, I work with people to help them to understand that their ancestral patterns and stories are very potent and have a great deal to do with some of the things they may struggle with today. And that knowing the history is quite important in our own story. And art does tell stories. Now, here's another example. If I was to take that woman's art and say, oh my gosh, there's so much suffering going on. I wonder if she's in pain or she could be just painting something from the collective whole, like the war, like the trauma on a bigger perspective. You can't just look at someone's paintings and go, oh, that person is so twisted and torn and suffering. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're painting something about what is twisted and torn in the world that they've seen that people don't want to talk about maybe in their experience. Or maybe they're painting something that has to do with animals and nature because they want to give a message consciously that animals and nature, that many people are disconnected from that today. And maybe that's a part of their story. Or maybe it's just, look at the beauty. Can you see the beauty in this? So again, what is your story? Or what story would you like to tell? Or are you telling a story that people don't want to hear that is a part of what's going on in the world? You have an intent for your art. And then I just wanted to make one final point about projection and about the fact that you have the final interpretation of your art. So again, piggybacking on the last thing I just talked about, you can't just look at someone's art and say, oh, this is what it's talking about for this artist in a line. I know even in 2021, artists are still doing this to each other. And I told you the example of an artist herself who's been doing art for quite some time, said what she said to me. You don't see those colors on that river. That river is nothing but mud, or that sunrise doesn't look like that. And, I've laughed because, I first of all, I feel compassion for her, because if she's going to vocalize and verbalize like that, she can't be feeling very well inside herself. So there's that piece. But I laugh because I don't take that on, because I see that as more of a projection, right? When people have something to say, often they're projecting. However, I want to also say that it's not always about projection. Sometimes it just is. Sometimes what we're looking at is just what it is. So it's not always projection. Or sometimes we create a piece, and we're creating a piece because we're saying something about something that is. It's not a projection of ours. It's not we're disowning something about ourselves, or we're painting something dark. We're just painting something dark that we did see, or we're painting something dark people don't want to look at in our society today. So you have to be very careful. You don't know the artist. You don't know the artist until the artist tells you what they want their story to be, regardless of what you want to see in that piece. Now you can engage in a conversation, and that's why I feel, because maybe it's because I come from the place I do as a counselor, working in the field that I have for so long, that I've heard a lot and seen a lot of things in my own field that I disagree with. And we are always evolving and growing. I would hope as human beings that we can continue to get better and better at the things that we teach ourselves and others, so that our science continues to evolve, our art evolves, our spirituality, personal and spiritual synthesis evolves, our understanding of what the potential of the human being really is evolves. How we treat children, how we treat ourselves, how we treat each other, how we treat the environment, the planet, cultures. We can take this globally and further. So I invite you to pass this on to someone if you know that they're an artist and they might be inclined along these lines of which I'm talking. And let's see what we can do in terms of bringing some of these points into our own art. And so listen to this again. Every time you listen to this, you may find something else that you can take and implement into your own artwork. I hope that this video has been inspiring to you. And if you have found it so, please like and subscribe and share this with others. Until next time.